Good evening and welcome to the October 21st meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. Please everyone silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. John Schweizer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we assemble here tonight by your grace and under the flag of freedom. Give us the wisdom to realize the gifts you have given us and the strength needed to protect them. Bless those who serve overseas, who are away from their loved ones, keeping the flame of freedom lit for us all. We also ask that you protect those that make our streets safe and who respond when needed. And all this we pray, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert.
Present.
Mr. Heath.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mr. Kendall.
Here.
Mr. Lutz.
Here.
Mr. Twilliger.
Here.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Swayzer.
Here.
Mrs. Oda. Here. All members are present.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the October 7th meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, October 7, 2019. The city auditor was presented with the Auditor of State Award with distinction. Committee reports. Personnel Committee reported recommending the appointment of Cynthia Wingert to the City Beautification Committee, and that appointment was approved. Recreation and Parks Committee recommended that legislation be prepared to provide for a permit for the Troy Truck Yard event to be held on public property on November 2. Safety and Health Committee recommended that legislation be prepared authorizing an agreement with Miami County Public Health for 2020. Committee recommended legislation be prepared requesting a hearing be held regarding a liquor permit. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended that an alley vacation as recommended by the Troy Planning Commission be approved. Utilities Committee recommended that legislation be prepared authorizing a 3-year opt-out electric aggregation agreement with First Energy Solutions. Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing bidding for the water plant lime slaker replacement project. Resolution number R41, 2019, agreement with Miami County Public Health, first reading and adopted. Resolution R42, 2019, an agreement for a governmental opt-out electric power aggregation agreement was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R43, 2019, contract for water treatment plant lime slaker project was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R44, 2019, object to a liquor permit and request a hearing was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R45, 2019, agreement with Public Defenders Commission was given first reading, discussed, and adopted. Ordinance number 035, 2019, vacating a portion of an unimproved alley north of McCaig was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 036, 2019, authorizing use of areas for Troy Truck Yard event was given first reading and was adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned 7:39 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Kendall to adopt the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Mr. Lutz.
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mrs. Oda.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We'll move on then to committee reports. And our first committee report this evening is from Chairman Mr. William Twist and the Community and Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on October 16th to consider the petition filed on behalf of Gregory and Julie Haylers for the annexation of 21.8232 acres located off Washington Road from Concord Township. Based on the state law section under which this annexation petition was filed and qualifies, there is a very short timeline for council to consider 3 separate pieces of legislation addressing what services the municipal corporation would provide to any parcel within the city, including that proposed for annexation, a statement of buffering requirements, and legislation consenting or objecting to the annexation. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to provide for the 3 legislative items required by state law related to the annexation of 21.8232 acres from Concord Township. To meet the timeline of the state law for an expedited annexation, the committee does support emergency legislation, and that's respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swazer, and myself as Chair, William Twiss.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twiss. The next reports are from the Finance Committee, and Chairman, Mr. Tom Kendall.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on October 16th to consider recommending authorization of a Surface Transportation Program, later known as STP, grant application to the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, or also known as the MVRPC, for the East Main Street Reconstruction Project Phase 1 that commits the city to paying for no greater than 25% of the Phase 1 project cost. The Phase 1 project scope is Mulberry Street through the intersection with Frank Street. If approved, the funding would be available no earlier than state year 2025. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to submit an STP grant application for the East Main Street Reconstruction Project 1 that commits the city to pay no greater than 25% of that project and to execute any later documents that may be required if the grant is approved. Based on the application timing, committee supports emergency legislation. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swazer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions from council? You may continue.
Okay. This committee met on October 16th to consider recommending that an application be filed with the Ohio Development Services Agency, also known as the ODSA, for a $150,000 Target of Opportunity grant for Troy Community Works, also known as TCW, to use towards the renovation of their property at 1-3 East Main Street. This is a last dollar CDBG grant that can only be issued once TCW has secured all other financing, including the balance of a prior grant, to complete the renovation project. We note that these funds are CDBG grant dollars and are not general fund expenditures. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to file an application with the Ohio Development Services Agency for a $150,000 Target of Opportunity grant for Troy Community Works to use towards the renovation of their property at 1-3 East Main Street. This committee supports emergency legislation so that the application can be submitted without delay. And this too is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swazer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair.
Any questions from council?
Madam President, I do have a question.
Mr. Lutz?
Do we know when the application is due to the state?
Who might, yeah. Mr. Harris, can you come forward and address that question?
Sure. It is an open cycle grant process, so there would be about a year for it to be open for the application. It can be renewed, possibly.
And can you explain what the reason is then for the emergency legislation?
Because all the funding is dependent on the Targets of Opportunity grant. It's the last piece that's going in the capital stack, so to speak. So the bank, private lending is dependent upon the 150,000 Targets of Opportunity.
Okay,
I have a second question.
go ahead.
I appreciate Mr. Harris sending me a document that appeared to be the sources and uses of funds. And it looked like in that document, the complete total project was $2,640,480. Is that figure correct?
So it depends how you define the project. So there's construction project, then there's a full project in terms of the purchase and the pre-development expenses, then there's the construction aspect. So we're talking about the construction project for the Targets of Opportunity grant to go into it. That's more of a 2.3.
So that's the $2,260,480 figure that was provided in the detailed report that council received.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything further?
No.
Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, Mr. Harris. We now open the meeting to citizen comments. At this time, does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? If so, come to the microphone and state your name and address. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Kerber is our timekeeper.
Good evening. I'm Christy Schell. I'm the president of Troy Community Works. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate to the council that this is a project we've been working on for 4 years, going through various levels of conversation with banks and with the city on funding and different pieces. And we have a significant timeline that we had then submitted to Robin Oda. But this last piece, we were already pre-qualified for this TOG money, and so as we've been working on this, and it's been taking a long amount of time because of those different pieces that had expired. So we're reapplying for a grant that we've already been pre-approved for. So we've been relying on this money the entire time as in our full scope of the stack of the investment for the project. And so if we don't apply for it, we are definitely at a deficit of $150,000, which will change and could potentially jeopardize the project because we are at the very kind of end of our possibilities of that. So I just want to respectfully request that that be taken into consideration as we get very close, and we've been doing a lot of work and waiting for this project to happen. So just respectfully make those comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Kent Frauenberger. I'm treasurer and on the board of Troy Community Works. And reiterating Christie's comments, I look forward to your support and thank you. Thank you for your support in the past and asking for the support for this on requesting state and federal money to be allocated toward Troy Community Works. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to resolutions. We have several before us this evening. Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R46, 2019.
Resolution number R46, 2019, resolution establishing municipal services for certain territory containing 21.8232 acres more or less in Concord Township, proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is the Hyler's annexation located off of Washington Road. This is the first of 3 pieces of legislation, first reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
Move to suspend.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by, by Mr. Heath to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Letts,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Move to adopt the resolution?
Second?
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Letts,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R47, 2019.
Resolution number R47, 2019, resolution establishing buffer requirements for certain territory containing 21.8232 acres more or less in Concord Township proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This again is the Highlands annexation located off Washington Road, and this is the second piece of legislation associated with responding to the county about the annexation. First reading.
Any comments from council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R48, 2019.
Resolution number R48, 2019, resolution consenting to the annexation of certain territory containing 21.8232 acres more or less in Concord Township to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This again is the Highlands annexation located off of Washington Road, and this is the third piece of legislation required to be filed with the county. First reading.
Any questions from council?
Move to suspend.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Heath to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger.
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Terwilliger and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R49, 2019.
Resolution number R49, 2019, a resolution authorizing the submittal of applications for federal FAST Act funds through the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission for the East Main Street Corridor Reconstruction Project Phase 1 and declaring an emergency. This was reported on this evening. The Phase 1 project is East Main from Mulberry Street through the Frank Street Frank Street intersection. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Kendall to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Heath,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read the last resolution, Resolution R50, 2019.
Resolution number R50, 2019, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to file an application with the State of Ohio to participate in the Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Economic Development Program and declaring an emergency. This would be applying for a grant of $150,000 towards the project at 13 East Main Street. First reading.
Any comments or questions from council?
I do have a question, Madam President.
Yeah, Mrs. Oda?
I just have a question about the emergency. Is there a deadline we're trying to meet? Or
We
is it
just
just at the,
Answered that, didn't we? I think Greg answered that, but, yes. Greg, do you want to reiterate the
Well-
response from earlier?
but it sounds like it's open-ended. Are we just in an emergency because,
So the grant itself can be applied as an open-ended cycle, but it's project-specific. And this project is requiring financing, meaning there's bank financing at
Right.
stake here, and the bank can't close a loan until all the funding is approved. So.
but there's not
a-
really a date that we're trying to meet?
It would be like ASAP, only because once the application is submitted, it takes 2 to 3 months for the state to review it and then to approve it, and then kick an agreement over to the city, and then have another closing to be able to disperse funds at
Okay,
that.
I just wanted more clarification on
It's
that.
a good question. I mean, it's involved, but basically the bank financing is dependent on this last source of funds.
Okay, thank you. Anything for, I don't, unless there's a further question here, we don't need anything further right now.
I'll move to suspend. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
No.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
No.
Mr. Twilliger?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, they're not.
Mayor Bamish, do you have any comments this evening?
Well, just a few. First of all, I just, it's dark and gloomy, and it's kind of a ugly fall day. However, I would like to look a little cheery about it and look back on our summer and the beginning of fall with our beautification committee. I thought they did an outstanding job this year of making our town look really appealing to anybody that came in for any visit or us who live here. And I would also include the Mercer Group in that compliment that I'd like to say. They worked real hard on the fountain, and I thought that was the icon that a lot of people look at in the media, and they really did a nice job this year. So just a kudo to the Mercer Group for what they did, and all the beautification committee that are volunteers, that many of them are master gardeners in our community that really take pride. And I wanted to say that on a day like today, when we easily get down and dark and gloomy, there was a lot of good things happening this year with our environment and our look. The other thing, I just want to share, Piqua last evening had a unity prayer session out at their gazebo in downtown. Commissioner Simmons and myself represented the county at that event, and it was well done. It rivals sort of like what we would do for the mayor's prayer gathering and breakfast. So I thought that was nice. They talked about being kind to one another, being respectful of one another, and if you do those two things, you can bring a little more peace in the world, and we need that. So I just wanted to share that. Hometown Halloween, for those who are interested, is coming up this Saturday. The Optimus Club always starts that morning with a costume contest and parade. And want to thank our advisors for always getting our Mayor's Youth Council there to help assist And that'll take place starting around the Government Center around 9 o'clock. We'll parade down to Proudy Plaza where we'll announce the costume contest winners. And so if you're interested and want to see a little, and families and pets can be a part of this too. So it's a fun event that takes place this Saturday. Mentioning that, I know Patrick, if you were here, would mention Beggars Night is Thursday, October 31st from 6 to 8. Haven't heard yet, but it's also that day before the big game rivalry, Troy versus Piqua, so there probably will be a pep rally down on Proudy Plaza. I haven't heard that for sure, but I think it's being planned after Beggars Night. So there's a couple of things going on that evening. And just so you know, leaf pickup is starting with rounds throughout the city, and it is starting today, or it started today on October 21st. We'll move through the downtown, through Troy, in rounds, and they're going to try to get at least 3 rounds of leaf pickup since they're just now really starting to fall. Those are the things I think we need to share a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Kerber, any comments this evening?
No, Madam President, thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to wish Captain Joe Long a long and happy retirement. We appreciate all of his years, I think about 33 years with the city of Troy. Are there any comments from council members this evening?
Madam President, I just wanted to
Mr.
give a
Twist.
shout out to the fire department. I know they were out at Lowe's doing some community events on just fire safety, and my kids enjoyed touring the ambulance and the fire truck. I just think they do an excellent job on those community events and are great with kids when they come up. And my 5-year-old did want to make sure I checked the batteries in my fire alarm, and did we have a fire extinguisher? Those were her questions for me. So I wanted to give a shout out to the fire department. They do an excellent job on those events.
Thank
I
you.
love their code.
All right, so glad. Anyone else on council have any comments this evening? Anyone from city staff have any comments this evening? Anyone in the audience have any comments? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Amy Shannon, 1560 Windbridge Place, Apartment D. I'm here as the chair of the Food Insecurity Committee for Miami County, and wanted to let you all know that we are having a pop-up pantry this Saturday. It's going to be at the parking lot of the Stouter building in the west parking lot. The pop-up pantry is basically a shared harvest food bank, which is our primary food bank for the county. Comes with a truck. People can line up in their cars. We take their information and load their cars with food. We've done 2 of these in Piqua. They've been extremely successful. Excuse me, the first one served over 600 people. The second one served over close to 500. And so we're trying it in Troy this time. We're expecting a pretty good turnout. It takes a lot of hands. So in addition to letting you know, I'd also like to ask you if you have time to come volunteer and help us. We would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Amy, can you state again the time and date of that?
It's on this Saturday, 12 to 2, and I do have flyers if anyone wants to grab any.
And where's it at?
It's at the Stouter parking lot, the west side.
And what time will
Stouter Center.
volunteers be needed to be there?
Anytime between 11 and 2.
Gotcha.
We hope to have a lot of produce that needs unloaded.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, my name is Kent Frauenberger. Not sure if this is the particular proper forum, but obviously Greg, who is not a member of Troy Community Works but serves on some of our committees, certainly took some of the questions. I opened myself up for how long you would like to question, and hopefully I can answer questions regarding the 1 to 3 East Main project that you have 4 years ago granted money through the state, federal funds to start the project. I throw myself open. If you have questions, I'll do the best I can to try to answer them.
Any council members have any further questions?
I'll just ask the general question, what's going on and what are the
Okay.
plans right now and what's going on?
Plans now are to, we've received building permits, we've got the architectural drawings, we have received our bids, chosen the best bidder for the reconstruction, the remodeling of that. We're working on obtaining financing. Everybody, this is a sort of a generalization, not many people want to be first. They want to see how you've done somewhere else, and then maybe they'll join in. So it's trying to put all the pieces together, everybody sign on the dotted line to get the money to do the development. We've chosen a bank who's been working with us. We've been working with a newly formed organization, Troy Refinance Fund, working on trying to obtain financing through them. We still have roughly $650,000 left of the $1 million grant that we started with back in August of 2015. It's taken a while for the financial institutions to understand that money. They want to see, they had a hard time trying to, when we tell them we have the money and trying to show it that it's not in the bank account. That was confusing. They've finally come to grips with the fact that it's awaiting disbursement, but the purse strings are held through the city administration. And of course, again, the money comes from state and federal financing. So not everybody wants to be first, but we're getting closer and closer. Again, I've done an appraisal on the building that the bank requires, and this $150,000 is just one of 3 or 4 pieces that need to go together before we can start. Again, a thing that's always been confusing to me, and explaining it to other people in the community as to, for instance, you've given us that initial $1 million, we've spent $200,000 to buy it, $150,000 in architect fees and consulting fees. How come we're not using the $650,000 to do something? And the problem is we'd love to, but the rules and regulations of the money don't allow you to do it until you can guarantee you can do the entire project. So you can't start. In the meantime, we wait and continue working to try to get the best financing available, so.
Yeah, Mr. Kendall?
So from what you're saying, I'm assuming you're needing to get finance for another million plus dollars?
Roughly $1.4 million after the $150,000.
Right.
A lot of money. But it's a $2.6 million project, including the purchasing of the building. Ends up with 8 apartments, 4 businesses on the first floor, elevator, furnishings, repurposed windows. Interesting fact, I mean, the windows will all be restored per historic guidelines. But they won't be 2019 standards. And it's because if we were a private developer and not taking government money, we wouldn't have to do that.
Is this something that your feeling is you're going to be able to obtain all this next year, or?
Well, we're going to now have to, we did get this emergency legislation now, so that will apply for the 150. The 150 will go in for that application when we get it with our other ducks in a row, and then we need them to approve that. Let's say they don't. That's more delay.
Yeah. You talk about a timeline, but I haven't seen that.
Right.
I guess.
So.
Okay, any Further questions?
I have a question. You say the 4 businesses are going to be created. How many net new jobs do you expect the project to create?
That's a good question. I'm thinking they're all, would be retail service oriented. We use Grandpa Joe's, happens to be interested in the space, maybe that space afterwards. Do they employ 5, 6, 7 people maybe? I would say they would be a representative of the type of client that would be interested in that space. It's not going to be manufacturing,
Right. You have another?
so it's not going to be labor intensive.
Is the intention to be the landlord then and to rent out the space, or is the intent ultimately, when everything is completed, to sell the building?
That's a challenge that the Troy Community Works Board does look at. Do we want to be, are we capable of being just developers and then flip it? Or can we be landlords and manage the property and then redevelop and manage other properties? And it's a question that we talk about every board meeting of what do we have the stomach for and what do we have the capabilities for. I wish I had a simple answer. I don't, other than we think about it and not really sure. We know that there's a place for our organization in downtown redevelopment because we have the capacity to get what is considered free money. Not all of it free. In this case, obviously, we can't get it all free. We're going to have to borrow a huge amount of money, and we'll have a huge mortgage, and we're going to have to collect rent to pay for that mortgage. Then how long do we want to stick it out as a landlord? Again, I'm sorry, that's the best answer I can give. So.
Can I follow up on that a little bit?
Sure.
You would have had a significantly more mortgage if the city hadn't converted their loan to a grant.
Absolutely. In fact, it would not be viable because you would not be able to collect enough rent to pay for that mortgage.
Right. So, and I know a number of us were on council when that first started. I don't know, Ken, it's a good, I'm not saying this in a negative for the project. I think it's a good project. I don't know if you attended the committee meeting, but the sense I got, or at least I can speak for me personally, was we were okay with this last dollar grant, but if your air conditioner goes bad or you need repairs, we're not going to serve as the bank going forward. And I think we will, and I see some nods in the head out there. I just want to make sure that that's, and again, I can't speak for the city. I'm only one person up here, but, I would hope that that sentiment is expressed to your board that we've already converted this to a grant. We've invested significantly in the project. It's as the mayor calls it, it's the living room of our community. But at some point in time, there has to be some economic viability for the project.
And I guess I'd counter by saying this is not coming from city money.
No, I agree.
So it's citizens of San Diego and Miami, Florida, and Cincinnati, Ohio, all put in the money for these state and federal grants. You're administering it.
No, I understand the 150. I'm just talking about.
I'm talking about the million.
Yeah.
It wasn't city money.
Right.
The same grant type money. But you are administering, and it did require you to grant it. But it didn't come from us as taxpayers of Troy any more than it came from taxpayers of San Diego, California. I guess that's again, don't want to sound ungrateful because we wouldn't be anywhere where we are without it to begin with. The question, when we look back, we did not realize also when it happened of what financial institutions would think about the gravity of the remodel cost versus what the financial world thinks the building is worth when it's done. And that's a gut check when they do that, because that's a reflection on our whole community then, what it's considered worth when it's done. So.
Mrs. Zoda, did you have a question?
Do you have any sense of the interest in renting the apartments? What kind of interest is there in that? And you guys will be acting as landlords,
Absolutely.
but
So-
it sounds like that's an undetermined amount of time?
Again, we've have, at the moment, more concrete interest in the 4 retail spaces. Those commercial entities seem to understand the economics and what downtown can mean from a commercial standpoint. There is interest on the apartments to try to get anyone to commit when we can't tell you when the apartment will be ready is the nut that we haven't crossed yet. But as again, our commercial real estate representative who's here tonight has gotten lots of people asking, but will it be ready next month or 2 months? It definitely is a no, and how many people can wait? So you don't have a line of people saying, call us in 11 months and then we'll be ready, because we can move out wherever we are. We don't have that. We think there's a lot of interest when we look around at our downtown competition and what's available and what people are willing to, we use obviously the Dye building, or I call it the Caroline building, the nice apartment on that one, and that's leased and at a very, very good rate. So we think there's great optimism for us, and so do the financial institutions that are looking at our numbers to say, yes, we'd be willing to loan you, once you get it all together, we'll be willing to loan you the money, because we see that, we see your capability of paying the mortgage, in essence.
I had asked several questions today and just got it from Greg around 6 tonight, so I forwarded it to all of you guys.
One of the questions was, it's an easy one to answer, who owns the building? Right? That was one of your questions?
Yeah, I haven't had time to read all the answers.
Oh, that one I can answer. Troy Community Works owns the building. So.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Being willing to answer all the questions.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience have any questions or comments this evening?
Yeah, Lester Connor, 1210 South Clay Street, Troy, Ohio. Seemed to be a lot of questions, and I don't understand why you had a bunch of questions after you okayed it. Sounds to me, or looks to me, like you would ask a question before you okayed it. Dumbfounds me. You came up with a whole bunch of questions, but you okayed it before you even asked questions. Is this the way Troy does things? It seems like it. It's sad. Okay, he says they own the building. What happens if they go under? Do they take the profit of when they sell the building, or do they repay anything back, or, where's it go? You guys are just something else.
Does anyone else in the audience have any comments or questions?
Chrissy Schell, again, president of Troy Community Works. I want to thank you for filtering your questions to us. We have been working that. We've been talking very readily with the city manager, or with the safety and city manager, and then also with several different board members at different times. And we realize that there has been an element of non-communication, because as we move one step forward, we seem to kind of keep moving one step back. So trying to schedule some of those updates and things like that have been challenging for us. The one thing I said is you're definitely going to hear some of our personal frustrations with the project, because we want this to happen as much as anyone else wants it to happen. And as we move forward, we are very grateful to the city and especially Greg Harris and his support at the city, really putting numbers together, really helping us with applications and moving through the historic preservation process and really guiding us as we become who we are with this project. To give my perspective, two questions they asked. One is that the hope is whatever we do, that the money starts to develop in a way that our fundraising efforts come through the rent of these projects. So as we start to pay back those loan pieces that we need to do, that those go into future projects. So our goal is not to be a landlord. Our goal is not to be any of those things as much as try to help some of the projects that can't get funded. The reality of the issue is that the building prays for 1.2 million, right? 1.2? 1.1 million, and the project cost 2.4. And so no developer, no one was going to be able to do this building to the level of what needs to be happening to get it to the quality as without this grant and without this nonprofit perspective. And so we feel like we hope that we become a very critical piece of what the community can do moving forward. And so that piece of it to understand is kind of our frustration. We see all this potential in all the ways that we can help, and then we keep having to figure out exactly how to work through this system. So I appreciate all your support. I appreciate your patience. Our board definitely appreciates that, but we also are as frustrated as everyone else. And our timeline is we're hoping that, and this is why this TOG piece was so critical this evening, is because we are looking at a 90-day potential start at this point because funding is starting to formulate, and we're at that point again. We just hope that we're getting past the goal line this time and not getting pulled back to the 50-yard line or whatever. So thank you very much for all your support, and we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments this evening? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peace-filled week. Meeting adjourned.